How far is $2 million from a billion? If something is growing at 93% a month, the answer is about 9.5 months. That sounds like the kind of claim you would expect from a bad finance ad. But it comes from a calculation Paul Graham used in a recent talk at the Oxford Union. Graham is a co-founder of Y Combinator and the author of Hackers and Painters. Since 2005, YC has funded roughly 6,500 startups. Around 30 of their founders have already become billionaires, Graham says, and more are getting close. His talk was not really about a shortcut to wealth. It was about a claim you hear all the time, that nobody gets that rich without cheating, exploiting people, or doing something morally rotten. Graham's answer is that this is possible to do. Rare, difficult, and far from guaranteed, but possible. He told a story about a founder he had spoken to recently. As he usually does, he asked about her company's growth rate. She said it had grown 93% the month before. If the value of the company is rising at anything like that pace, then the value of her stake is rising quickly too. She is getting richer at an extraordinary rate. But why? Not because she found a clever way to take money from people. Her startup was growing because users loved what she and her co-founder had made. They had spent a huge amount of effort making the product useful. People used it, liked it, and told their friends. That kind of word of mouth is where startup growth comes from. Someone replied to Graham online that having a few $1 million and being a billionaire were completely different things. Fair enough. So Graham did the math. Take a few million to mean $2 million. To get from $2 million to $1 billion, you need a 500-fold increase. 93% monthly growth. How long does that take? About 9.45 months. That is hard to absorb because we do not naturally think in exponential terms. We imagine a little more money next month, then a little more the month after. On that scale, $1 billion looks impossibly far away. But a startup with strong word of mouth does not grow in a straight line. In the beginning, it may look small and unimportant. Then the curve starts to bend. If it keeps going, the result can become absurdly large. That is why Graham asks founders about growth before he asks almost anything else. Growth rate is not just a number for a pitch deck. It tells you whether people actually want the thing you are building. Now, 93% a month is exceptional. Graham also gives a more ordinary example, 15% monthly growth. That is still fast, but it is not rare for a strong startup. If a company's revenue grows 15% every month for 5 years, it will be making about 4,384 times as much as it does today. Start at $10,000 a month. 5 years later, that becomes roughly $44 million a month, about $526 million a year in revenue. No company grows at exactly the same rate forever. Early growth may be faster, and later growth will almost certainly slow down. The point is not that every startup can follow this formula. The point is that a high growth rate, sustained over time, creates results that look impossible if you only think in straight lines. That is also why people often misread extreme wealth. They see the final number and assume there must be a hidden trick behind it. Sometimes there is. Graham is not claiming that every rich person got rich honestly, but it is a mistake to explain every large fortune as exploitation. In startups, the mechanism can be much simpler. Make something people want, let word of mouth spread it, and keep growing in a large enough market. That brings up the harder question. How do you make something people want badly enough to tell their friends about it? Graham's answer is not to spend all day trying to invent a startup idea. In fact, he thinks that can make people too cautious. Once you are looking for an idea that sounds like a business, you start rejecting anything that feels too strange, too small, or too hard to explain. The best ideas often look bad at first. Who needed a personal computer? Who would pay to sleep on an air mattress in a stranger's apartment? Who would believe that college students looking each other up online could become a global company? Apple, Airbnb, and Facebook all sounded questionable in the beginning. YC funded Airbnb, even though Graham and his colleagues thought the idea itself sounded bad. They invested because they liked the founders. His advice to young people is simple. Start with something you and your friends genuinely need. That does not mean you have to build a consumer app. Maybe you are a molecular biologist and there is a tool your lab needs. Maybe you are into drones. Maybe you are a programmer, designer, musician, or researcher, and there is a problem you keep running into. You may not know what the whole world wants, but you do know which problems are real in your own life, and those problems can be useful signals. Young people often start using things before everyone else does. What you and your friends care about now may become normal much later. Graham's example is Justin.tv. YC funded it in 2006. At the beginning, it was Justin Can walking around with a camera attached to the side of his head, live streaming his life. It sounded ridiculous. The company eventually became Twitch. That does not mean every weird project is secretly a billion-dollar company. Most weird projects are just weird projects. But a strange idea should not be rejected simply because it does not sound like a polished business plan. Sometimes it is the first sign of a need that nobody has properly noticed yet. The core of Graham's argument is empathy. A successful startup begins with understanding a group of users well enough to make exactly what they need. What are they trying to do? Where are they getting stuck? What would save them time, remove frustration, or make their lives meaningfully better? If you can answer those questions, you have a chance of building something people love. If people love it, they tell their friends. If that keeps happening in a large enough market, the company can grow far beyond what seemed possible at the beginning. So Paul Graham's talk is not really a guide to making $1 billion. It is an explanation of how billion-dollar outcomes happen. There are two variables: how fast a company grows and how long it can keep growing. The first comes from making something users love enough to recommend. The second comes from being in a large market. Get both right, and wealth can be the byproduct, not because you began by chasing money, but because you kept making something valuable for people who wanted it. That is difficult. It is not a formula, but it is not impossible. If you found this useful, subscribe for more. Don't forget to follow.